in time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important conversation. Across the globe, conflict has become a near daily headline. If you think about it, whether it's here on the African continent, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and abroad, Gaza being very, very notable, Ukraine, and many others that are beyond. It seems like millions and millions of civilians continue to bear the devastating consequences of war, but yet the statistics are real lives. The numbers that we read about or we see on television are people, it's women, it's children, it's families that have been displaced, that have been traumatized, and that are struggling to rebuild. Now, African women leaders are warning that the world is becoming dangerously accustomed to conflict. We're becoming numb to it. They're arguing that that war is becoming accepted as inevitable rather than prevented. And as the world marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the Beijing Plus 30 African Women's Movement is calling on African government institutions and civil society to reject what it describes as the normalization of war and place peace, justice, and human security back at the center of public policy. And joining us now is Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, Chairperson of the Beijing Plus African Women's Movement. And we'll be having a conversation on the normalization of war and the implications that it has for those that are affected by it the world over. Geraldine, good morning and welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning and good to be on your show. Thank you very much.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And I want to jump right into it. You guys speak about the normalization of war, and I thought that was very, very poignant. What do you mean by that? And then why do you believe the world has reached this point where we've become accustomed to conflict and we've become numb to it? It has become the first reaction to any cause.
Yeah. So good morning once again to you and your listeners. And to your point of normalization of war, we have stated very clearly, and this is in the opinion piece that was carried in the Sunday Times this past Sunday, is one that says that what would have shocked the conscience of the continent a generation ago has, increasingly being treated as routine. So we have daily reports of bombed villages, displaced populations. I mean, we have close to 17 million displaced people in the Sudan, and this is internally displaced as well as externally. We see massacred civilians, we see sexual violence, starvation, collapsing states, and so on, and endless human crises. And it's no longer being treated with the urgency they deserve. I mean, you, for example, spoke about Gaza. I mean, we've seen genocide play out live on televisions all over the world. So the tragedy, as you point out, is not that war is spreading. The greater tragedy is that war is being normalized. So whether it's the Sudan or Eastern DRC, the Sahel to parts of the Horn of Africa, violence is increasingly become a feature of political life itself. So armed conflict is no longer being treated as an exception to politics, but it's becoming a defining feature of political life itself, and in too many places, it's becoming a substitute for politics.
And I think that's a very, very concerning state of affairs. And another concerning state of affairs is, and I think you guys have mentioned this also, is that when conflicts dominate the headlines like they've been quite aggressively for the last couple of years, we become desensitized to the human suffering behind all of the numbers and stats that are constantly thrown at us, especially with the rise of social media. How dangerous is that when you have the rest of the world now become essentially numb, desensitized to the fact that there is human suffering that's been that's happening all across the world, and which is viewed as numbers, as statistics. And I think most notably would be the Gaza genocide. It would be numbers upon numbers, almost on a daily, that you almost forget that these are innocent men, women, and children.
Yeah. So I'm going to deal with it in two parts. The first part is that in too many places, and this is on the African continent and globally, war has become an economic system. It's
Mm,
also become a method of governance, and on the continent, we may see it as a pathway to political power and a means of negotiating access to state resources. Elsewhere in the world, we have seen how it has been used in a very transactional manner as well. So for some of these actors, peace has become a threat, while war has become an opportunity. But what's even more troubling is the changing status of civilians. So, to
mm,
your point about the impact on people, in many contemporary conflicts, civilians are no longer unfortunate victims or viewed as unfortunate victims caught between warring parties. They've become increasingly become deliberate targets. And women carry that responsibility far beyond their own survival. And this is the point that the Beijing Plus 30 group and movement is raising. And that's why we say there's a need for a movement of women for peace on the African continent, because we, the women, have become the caregivers, the providers, the protectors, the custodians of communities under conditions of extraordinary hardship. Women
mm,
have faced displacement. They face the loss of livelihoods, hunger, sexual violence, forced migration, and collapse of essential social services. And yet they remain staggeringly and significantly underrepresented in the political decisions that determine the war and peace, mind you.
mm,
And children are perhaps the greatest victims of all. So, this destruction of civilian life is no longer merely collateral damage, it's increasingly becoming the logic of war itself. Again, whether you talk about the Sudan, whether you talk about the DRC, or you talk about Gaza, or what's playing out in Iran and places. So entire societies are being traumatized, and communities that have lived together for generations are being torn apart.
mm,
Reconciliation is becoming more difficult and state building more fragile. So the democratic transitions are becoming more elusive, and development becomes almost impossible.
mm,
And
mm.
African peace institutions are under immense strain at the moment. If we talk specifically about our continent and look at our country as well. So back
Mm.
to you, sir.
No, thank you so much. I think you raised some very very important points, and I think that the point that you made about women being the most affected by some of the conflicts that we see play out around the world was very very important, because uh, research constantly shows that peace agreements are more durable and more effective when women are involved in negotiations and are the center of some of these negotiations. But then my question would be, why are women still very much underrepresented at peace tables? I mean, you spoke about the Iran war, and with the United States of America and Israel, and there are negotiations that are happening right now, and you just look at the delegations that are there to discuss the way forward and peace finding kind of methods to this conflict, and there isn't any women represented, and they're the most affected, and they can tell you firsthand the impact that some of these conflicts have directly on them.
So let's not go to Iran. let's not go elsewhere. Let's just look at the continent.
Mm,
And when you look at it, I suppose I'd want to raise a few points. I could say patriarchy is enduring, and even more so in war. And most importantly, I think leadership for peace is becoming increasingly scarce, while leadership for war often appears more visible, and hence you see what you see. And it's against this backdrop that the Beijing Plus 30 African women's movement is advancing a Women for Peace in Africa initiative, because we believe it's peace is just too precious to be left to governments and formal institutions alone.
mm,
Sustainable peace requires the active participation of citizens, women's organization, youth movements, faith communities, intellectuals, traditional leaders, humanitarian actors, and civil society. And I haven't even mentioned everyone that should be part of it. So the defense of peace must become a shared societal responsibility. And for that, the shape of the peace table, the architecture for peace must be inclusive. And that's what we arguing for. Because we believe that sustainable peace requires organized civic leadership that are capable of defending civilians, not those communicating hate. Leadership that can promote accountability, leadership that support mediation efforts, that strengthen social cohesion and generate public pressure for political solutions. So Africa has reached a moment where silence is no longer an option.
I want to talk about progress, if there's any, because I think the Beijing Platform for Action is now what, around 3 decades old, if I'm not mistaken. Just looking back over those 30 years, how much progress has been made in ensuring that women have a meaningful role in peace building and also conflict resolution. I'm sure there are examples that are notable, and that we can use as building blocks for a better strengthening of this conversation.
I wish we had more examples than we do. So,
Oh.
if you look at the Beijing Platform of Action, and in particular the 12 critical areas, and we look at the African continent, there's immediately two areas that stand out. One of that is looking at women leadership on the continent, and especially elected leadership, so to legislative bodies, particularly at national levels and probably to a degree at state or provincial levels. And we can immediately look at countries like Rwanda, South Africa to an extent,
Mm,
that we've seen that development. A second area that I would want to reference, and there's a big irony in this one, is the area of education, where there has been advances have been experienced. However, when we look at the critical area of peace and security, or looking at conflict, I mean, on the African continent, there's clearly a rolling back. Because
mm,
when you look at this particular question, and hence we're putting it on the table, is that we are seeing a normalization of war. If you look at the Eastern DRC, I think the kids that are growing up in that area live with the reality of war and fear that goes with it. When we look at Sudan, and I mean, the irony of the Sudan is that this is what links us to logics into the Middle East as well. And we're seeing proxies playing out in that part. So, some of the challenges that we are confronting is not that it is only perpetuated by Africans, it's also perpetuated by actors.
Geraldine, are you still there? All right, looks like we've lost Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, chairperson of the Beijing Plus Africa Women's Movement. I think that's where we're going to be wrapping up that conversation. When we come back after the short break, we'll turn our attention to another important conversation. We'll be examining the boundaries between free speech, activism, and defamation in South Africa. Stay with us.